Have you ever wondered what dark secrets lie buried in the forgotten records of America's past? What if I told you that the most disturbing cases aren't found in modern crime databases, but in the yellowed pages of courthouse archives that few dare to examine? Before you continue watching, comment where you're from and make sure to subscribe. This channel needs your support to continue uncovering these hidden histories that powerful interests would rather keep buried. In the winter of 1861, as the nation teetered on the precipice of civil war, a different kind of horror unfolded in the small township of Elmwood Creek, Arkansas. This is the story of Eleanor Blackwood, a woman whose quest for justice, or perhaps vengeance, would leave an indelible stain on the land that some say persists to this day. The Blackwood Manor stood as a monument to wealth amidst the rolling hills just outside Elmwood Creek. Built by cotton magnate Thaddeus Blackwood in the 1830s, the imposing Greek Revival structure with its towering white columns and sprawling grounds represented everything the ambitious settlers of the Arkansas Territory aspired to become. By all accounts, Thaddeus was a hard man but fair in his business dealings, having arrived from Virginia with little more than determination and a sharp mind for commerce. What few knew was how he had secured his initial capital through his marriage to Eleanor Sutherland, daughter of a modestly successful merchant from Tennessee. Their union in 1832 had been marked by an unusually detailed marriage contract, including specific provisions for Eleanor's substantial dowry of $5,000, an enormous sum for the time, to be repaid with interest should the marriage dissolve under certain conditions. For 29 years, the Blackwoods presented themselves as the very picture of antebellum success. They hosted lavish parties attended by politicians and businessmen from as far as Little Rock and Memphis. Their 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, were sent east for education, as befitted their station. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss at Blackwood Manor. "I remember delivering mail to that house as a young man," recounted Jeremiah Campbell in a statement recorded by the Arkansas Historical Society in 1902. "Mrs. Blackwood always received me herself, no matter the weather or hour. There was something in her eyes, a watchfulness, like she was waiting for something, and the way she would ask about letters from lawyers or banks in Little Rock. It wasn't natural how interested she was in such matters, especially for a lady of her standing." The veneer of domestic harmony shattered on March 16, 1861. Thaddeus Blackwood was found dead in his study, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on his desk alongside an opened letter. Initial reports suggested financial troubles as the nation's political instability threatened the cotton market. William Hayes ruled it a suicide brought about by melancholia and business anxieties. But 3 days after the funeral, Eleanor Blackwood appeared at the Elmwood Creek courthouse with a leather portfolio containing dozens of carefully preserved documents, marriage contracts, receipts, loan agreements, and most crucially, what she called Dowry Chits. These were small, handwritten notes, signed by Thaddeus, acknowledging portions of her dowry used for various investments over the years, with promised repayment terms. "The coroner, Dr. The widow, entered my office with such calm determination," wrote County Clerk Thomas Whitaker in his private journal, recently discovered during courthouse renovations in 1998. "She laid out those papers like a general deploying troops. Each document was dated, annotated, and cross-referenced to others, some dated back almost 30 years. I've never seen such meticulous record-keeping from anyone, let alone a woman, supposedly concerned only with household matters." Eleanor's claim was unprecedented. She argued that her husband had systematically misappropriated her dowry funds, using them as capital for his business ventures without proper accounting or repayment as stipulated in their marriage contract. The total sum, she claimed, with compounded interest, amounted to over $20,000, more than the value of Blackwood Manor and all its holdings combined. More shocking still was her assertion that Arkansas territorial law from the time of her marriage granted her the right to claim the entirety of her husband's estate as compensation, superseding even the inheritance rights of their children. She had discovered this obscure legal provision through years of careful research, conducted through correspondence with attorneys in Little Rock, Memphis, and even as far as Boston. "I have waited patiently for 29 years," Eleanor reportedly told the stunned courthouse officials. "I have played the role expected of me. I have raised his children and maintained his home. But I have never forgotten what was rightfully mine." Judge Carlton Merriweather, presiding over the probate court, was faced with an unprecedented legal challenge. Eleanor's claim rested on territorial laws that predated Arkansas's statehood, creating a complex legal question about which statutes applied. Moreover, the impending civil conflict meant that many higher courts were preoccupied with more pressing matters. As word spread through Elmwood Creek of Eleanor's claim, the community's reaction was swift and harsh. Women were not expected to challenge their husbands' financial decisions, especially not after death, and certainly not at the expense of their children's inheritance. Eleanor became a pariah overnight. "People stopped speaking to her in town," recalled Sarah Jenkins, whose grandmother had been a cook at a neighboring estate. "They said she was going against God's natural order." Some of the more superstitious folk started calling her a witch, saying she'd made some unholy bargain to strike down her husband and steal what belonged to her children by rights. Yet Eleanor remained unmoved by the social ostracism. She continued to live alone in Blackwood Manor while the legal proceedings dragged on, attended only by a handful of loyal servants. Her children, now adults established in their own lives in Boston and Philadelphia, wrote increasingly desperate letters begging her to abandon her claim. These letters, preserved in the Elmwood Creek Historical Society, show a growing rift between Eleanor and her offspring. "Mother, I implore you to reconsider this ruinous course," wrote her eldest son, Theodore, in April 1861. "Father's death is tragedy enough without this spectacle you are creating. Whatever grievances you harbored against him should have been buried with him. Your actions shame us all and threaten to destroy the legacy he built for us." Eleanor's response was equally preserved. "My dearest Theodore, you speak of your father's legacy as if it were created from nothing but his own industry. Every dollar that built your childhood home, that paid for your education, that established your place in society, began as mine. What you call his legacy was built with my sacrifice. I have remained silent for 3 decades. I will not do so any longer." As the case progressed through preliminary hearings, strange occurrences began to be reported around Blackwood Manor. Lights were seen moving through the house at odd hours. Eerie sounds, like the scratching of pen on paper or the counting of coins, echoed from the empty study where Thaddeus had died. Local children began to dare each other to approach the property at night, returning with wild tales of a ghostly woman walking the grounds, muttering numbers and clutching papers to her chest. The case took an even darker turn when Judge Merriweather, after several weeks of deliberation, was found dead in his chambers in early May. The official cause was listed as apoplexy, but rumors spread that he had been on the verge of ruling in Eleanor's favor, having discovered additional precedents supporting her claim. His replacement, Judge Horace Blackburn, was a longtime friend of the Blackwood family and made no secret of his disdain for Eleanor's petition. What we're witnessing is nothing less than an attempt to undermine the very foundations of property law in our state, Judge Blackburn declared during one hearing. "If we allow wives to challenge their husbands' financial decisions posthumously, no man's estate would be secure." Despite this setback, Eleanor's case gained unexpected support from an unlikely quarter. Several prominent businessmen in Little Rock and even as far as St. Louis filed amicus briefs supporting her legal reasoning, if not her specific claim. Historians later discovered that many of these men had been business rivals of Thaddeus, eager to see his estate diminished and his reputation tarnished. By June, as Arkansas formally joined the Confederacy and military matters took precedence over civil disputes, Eleanor's case remained unresolved. Judge Blackburn repeatedly delayed hearings, citing the national emergency. Eleanor, undeterred, took an unprecedented step. She posted copies of her dowry chits and marriage contract on the courthouse door and on trees throughout Elmwood Creek, making her private financial affairs a matter of public record. "The widow has lost her mind entirely," wrote Margaret Holloway, wife of the local minister, in a letter to her sister. "She has plastered the town with papers covered in figures and legal terms, as if the common folk have any interest in or understanding of such matters. Thomas says it's a desecration of the sanctity of marriage to air such private matters so publicly. The children in the Sunday school now play at being the mad widow counting her money in the churchyard." What followed was a series of increasingly disturbing incidents that summer. A clerk who had been assisting Eleanor in copying legal documents was found drowned in Elmwood Creek, his pockets filled with small stones inscribed with figures matching the sums on Eleanor's dowry chits. The new courthouse cat, acquired to control mice, repeatedly dragged dead rodents to the corner of the records room where Eleanor's case files were stored. Most alarming was the discovery that someone had been systematically altering land records relating to Blackwood properties, changing dates and names in ways that strengthened Eleanor's claim. "I do not know what forces Mrs. Blackwood has enlisted in her cause, but I fear they are not of this world," wrote Reverend Holloway in his private journal, discovered decades later during church renovations. "Last night I dreamed I saw her husband standing behind her as she sat writing at her desk, his ghostly hand guiding hers across the page, his head still bearing the wound that took his life. Upon waking, I felt compelled to examine Scripture for guidance on whether the dead might seek to right wrongs committed in life." By August, with the war drawing away able-bodied men and resources, Elmwood Creek found itself increasingly isolated from state authority. In this power vacuum, Eleanor's position in the community underwent a subtle transformation. Those who had once shunned her began to approach her for loans or financial advice, discovering that her knowledge of contracts and interest calculations far exceeded that of many local businessmen. Some whispered that she had learned these skills through supernatural means. "She knew things no woman should know," stated Abigail Turner in a folk history recorded in 1923. "My grandfather said she could calculate compound interest in her head faster than the bank manager could, with paper and pencil. She started keeping accounts for some of the widows in town after their men went to war, and every penny was accounted for. But she'd only help those who acknowledged her claim to the manor. Those who sided against her found their own finances in disarray, debts called in suddenly, promissory notes lost, livestock dying without explanation." On September 12, 1861, a fire broke out in the courthouse records room. By the time it was extinguished, many of the oldest property records had been damaged or destroyed. But Eleanor's case file, stored in the same area, remained untouched. Judge Blackburn publicly accused her of arson, though no evidence was found to support this charge. 3 days later, the judge's own home burned to the ground while he was visiting relatives in Little Rock, claiming the lives of 2 servants. When Judge Blackburn returned to find his home in ashes, he immediately rode to Blackwood Manor, accompanied by the town sheriff and several deputies. Their intention, according to witness accounts, was to arrest Eleanor on suspicion of multiple crimes. What they found instead was Eleanor calmly sitting in the manor's grand foyer, surrounded by stacks of papers and ledgers. "I've been expecting you, gentlemen," she reportedly said. "I believe you'll find everything in order now." She presented them with a document bearing the seal of the Confederate government in Richmond, a formal recognition of her claim to Blackwood Manor and all associated properties, signed by Attorney General Judah P. Benjamin himself. The document cited the unusual legal circumstances, the evidence she had amassed, and the need for legal clarity during wartime as justification for this extraordinary intervention. How Eleanor had secured this ruling remains one of the most mysterious aspects of the case. No record exists of her traveling to Richmond, and communication with the Confederate capital was already becoming difficult due to Union blockades. Some historians suggest she may have had connections through her family in Tennessee, while others propose more implausible theories involving bribery or blackmail of government officials. Judge Blackburn reportedly turned pale upon reading the document, then suffered a seizure on the spot. He died before a doctor could be summoned. His last words, according to Sheriff William Tanner, were, "She made a deal with the devil. The price will come due." With her legal victory secured, Eleanor wasted no time in asserting her authority. She renamed the property Sutherland Manor, reverting to her maiden name. She dismissed half the household staff, particularly those who had been loyal to her late husband. Most significantly, she converted Thaddeus's study, the room where he had died, into her personal office, where she began conducting business previously considered the exclusive domain of men. The widow sits at her dead husband's desk from sunrise to sunset, wrote Reverend Holloway in October 1861. Through my field glass, I can see her from the church steeple, always writing, calculating, planning. The light in that room burns until dawn some nights. What business could possibly occupy a woman so thoroughly? I have prayed for her soul, but I fear something else now occupies that house alongside her. As the war intensified, Elmwood Creek found itself increasingly isolated from the larger conflict. Union forces controlled the Mississippi River, while Confederate troops were concentrated farther south. In this power vacuum, Eleanor's influence grew. By winter, she had provided loans to most of the remaining businesses in town, acquired liens on several neighboring properties, and established herself as the de facto authority in local matters. Her methods of record-keeping became increasingly bizarre. Visitors to the manor reported seeing rooms where the walls were covered entirely with figures and calculations, stretching from floor to ceiling. She began carrying a leather-bound ledger wherever she went, constantly updating it with observations and numbers that seemed to have no obvious meaning. Most disturbing were the dolls she created. Small, faceless figures made from scraps of legal documents and ledger pages, each bearing the name of a prominent Elmwood Creek resident on its chest. "She gave me one of those paper dolls," recalled Mary Winters, who had been a young girl during the war. "Said it would protect me from financial hardship all my days if I kept it close. My mother tried to burn it when she found it, but it wouldn't catch fire. We buried it instead, deep in the woods, but the next morning it was sitting on my windowsill, damp with dew, but otherwise unmarked." By the spring of 1862, people began to disappear from Elmwood Creek. First were those who had spoken most vocally against Eleanor's claim, then those who owed her money, but had fallen behind on payments. No bodies were ever found, but strange additions appeared on the property. New gardens with unusual plants, a root cellar that hadn't existed before, a well that people swore had been dug in a single night. Children reported seeing the missing townspeople walking the grounds of the manor after dark, carrying papers and boxes, their movements stiff and their eyes vacant. When adults investigated these claims, they found nothing but dowry chits nailed to trees, the ink glistening wetly in the moonlight as if freshly written. "My husband went to the manor to discuss a debt," stated Caroline Pruitt in a deposition given to Union officials in 1864. "He never came home. When I went looking for him the next day, Mrs. Blackwood, she insisted on being called Miss Sutherland by then, showed me his signature on a contract I'd never seen before. It stated that in lieu of payment, he had agreed to provide services in perpetuity to the estate. His handwriting looked strange, shaky, like he'd been forced to sign. When I demanded to see him, she smiled and said he was invested in the foundation of the property and could not be disturbed. The Civil War reached Elmwood Creek in April 1863, when a Union scouting party arrived to assess the area. The officer in charge, Lieutenant James Morrison, documented his strange encounter with the town in his official report, later preserved in federal archives. Arrived at settlement designated as Elmwood Creek to find it in singular condition. Town appears physically intact, but largely depopulated. Remaining residents reluctant to speak with Union forces, displaying unusual deference to local widow who appears to control all significant property and commerce in the area. Subject identified as Eleanor Sutherland, formerly Blackwood, resides in large manor house flying neither Union nor Confederate colors. Upon meeting said individual, was presented with extensive documentation of her neutrality in the conflict and evidence of financial arrangements with both Richmond and Washington banking interests. Subject displays uncanny knowledge of troop movements and supply conditions that suggests access to intelligence beyond what should be available to civilian in isolated region. Most concerning was her proposal to invest in the Union cause through an elaborate bond scheme she had devised. Terms were unusually favorable, but contained clauses in minute writing that raised suspicions. After consultation with my officers, declined offer despite potential strategic advantages. Recommend avoiding further engagement with Elmwood Creek and its mistress unless militarily necessary. Lieutenant Morrison and his men departed the next day. 3 weeks later, his entire unit was reported missing after a routine patrol. When a larger force was sent to investigate, they found no trace of the men except for their uniforms, neatly folded and stacked on the porch of Sutherland Manor, each bearing a small paper tag listing a man's name and a monetary value. By the summer of 1863, Elmwood Creek had become a ghost town, except for the manor and its immediate surroundings. Travelers were warned to avoid the area, with tales spreading throughout Arkansas of a witch widow who collected debts in blood and bound souls through contracts. Confederate deserters who attempted to hide in the abandoned buildings reported hearing the constant scratching of pens and rustling of paper throughout the town, though no one could be seen. A Confederate chaplain, Father Matthias Burke, visited the area in August on what he described as a spiritual mission to reclaim a place fallen into darkness. His journal, discovered decades later in a New Orleans archive, contains the most detailed account of Sutherland Manor during this period. The grounds are immaculate yet unnatural, with gardens arranged in patterns that resemble ledger columns when viewed from the upper windows. The manor itself has been transformed. The elegant plantation home now more resembles a bank or counting house. Every surface is covered with figures, calculations, and what appear to be accounts of debts owed and collected. Ms. Sutherland received me cordially, but with an air of amusement, as if my concern for her soul was a quaint but irrelevant distraction from more important matters. When I inquired about the town's missing residents, she referred me to her investment portfolio and showed me a room where hundreds of small paper dolls stood on shelves, each meticulously labeled with a name and value. Everyone in this life represents a certain worth, she told me. Most never realize their full potential for growth. I simply help them appreciate over time. Most disturbing was the cellar she showed me without any apparent concern for how it would appear. The walls were lined with what she called matured investments, alcoves containing what appeared to be calcified human remains embedded in the very foundation of the house, each partially preserved body holding scraps of paper in their rigid fingers. My husband taught me the importance of a solid foundation, she explained, as casually as if showing me a root cellar. Every great fortune is built upon the bodies of those who contributed to its growth. I fled that night, unable to complete the exorcism I had planned. I could not determine if the evil resided in the woman, the house, or the very land itself. All I know is that as I rode away, I could hear her voice on the wind, reciting figures and calculations, as if the very air was another ledger to be balanced. Father Burke died of unknown causes 3 days after writing this account, his body discovered clutching a dowry chit signed with Eleanor's maiden name, though he had reported destroying all papers she had given him. As the Civil War ground toward its bloody conclusion, Elmwood Creek and Sutherland Manor faded from official records. When Union forces established firmer control of Arkansas in 1864, they found the town deserted and the manor mysteriously burned to its foundation. Archaeological excavations conducted in the 1970s revealed that the foundation contained anomalous materials that researchers described as ossified organic matter integrated with the stone and mortar in a manner inconsistent with known construction techniques of the period. No trace of Eleanor Sutherland was ever found. Some accounts place her in New Orleans after the war, others in Boston or even London, always described as a wealthy widow with unusual business acumen and a leather portfolio of ancient-looking papers. Bank records from the post-war period show that someone using various permutations of the Sutherland and Blackwood names established accounts in major financial centers across the United States and Europe, all managed through an intricate network of proxies and legal entities. The land where Blackwood Manor once stood remains vacant to this day. Developers who have attempted to build on the property report equipment failures, accounting discrepancies, and workers refusing to return to the site after experiencing dreams of a woman standing over them with a ledger, calculating the value of their lives down to the penny. In 1987, during construction of a highway that would have passed near the former manor grounds, workers uncovered a sealed metal box containing hundreds of dowry chits dating from 1832 to 1986. Each bore the signature of Eleanor Sutherland and that of another individual, many of whom were verified to have lived and died in various parts of the country over more than a century and a half. The box disappeared from the county evidence locker 3 days later, along with the clerk who had been cataloguing its contents. To this day, residents of the area report seeing lights moving across the empty field where the manor once stood. Some claim to hear the scratching of pen on paper carried on the night breeze. Most disturbing are the reports from financial professionals, accountants, bank officers, investment advisors, who describe dreams of a woman in 19th century dress standing at the foot of their bed, offering to teach them the true nature of compound interest and the real cost of debt. Perhaps most unsettling is the fact that every decade since Eleanor's disappearance, dowry chits bearing her signature have surfaced in probate courts across America, always in cases involving disputed inheritances and always suggesting debts that, with accumulated interest, would consume the entire estate in question. The financial ledgers of Elmwood Creek Township contain one final entry dated December 31st, 1865, in an elegant hand unlike that of any known county official. Accounts temporarily suspended. All outstanding debts remain valid and continue to accrue interest until collection becomes viable. Balance will be restored in due time. The entry bears no signature, only a small drawing of a house with figures that look like people built into its foundation. Some say that if you stand on the former grounds of Sutherland Manor on the anniversary of Thaddeus Blackwood's death and whisper that you dispute Eleanor's claim to the property, you'll find a dowry chit bearing your name nailed to your front door the next morning. The initial amount will be small, trivial even, but the interest compounds daily. And Eleanor Sutherland always collects her debts, one way or another. The story of the terrifying ruling and Eleanor's claim to the manor serves as a reminder that some debts can never truly be settled, some claims never fully resolved. In our modern world of digital banking and automated transactions, we rarely consider the true cost of what we owe, not just in money, but in life and spirit. Financial records from major crashes throughout American history From the Panic of 1873 to the Great Depression to the 2008 financial crisis, contain occasional references to unusual transactions traced to holding companies with variations of the Sutherland name. Each time, these entities seem to profit enormously from the financial ruin of others. Perhaps before you sign your next contract or take out your next loan, you should read the fine print very carefully. Some agreements bind more than just your credit. Some debts claim more than just your money. And somewhere, a widow may still be keeping your accounts, waiting for the perfect moment to post your chit and collect what she believes is rightfully hers. Look to God. Look to Jesus Christ. For only divine grace can protect your soul from those who would claim it as collateral. Have you ever looked closely at the foundation of an old house and wondered what secrets might be buried within its walls? What would you do if you discovered that your home, your legacy, was built on something far more sinister than stone and mortar? Before we continue with this dark journey, take a moment to comment where you're watching from, and please subscribe to help us keep unearthing these forgotten horrors that powerful forces have tried to erase from history. While the fate of Eleanor Sutherland after the Civil War remains shrouded in mystery, the ripple effects of her financial machinations continued to be felt throughout the region for decades. The land where Blackwood Manor once stood became known locally as Widow's Claim, a place avoided by sensible folks but occasionally visited by the desperate or the foolish. In 1878, during the economic hardships following the Panic of 1873, a farmer named Josiah Miller attempted to claim the abandoned property. County records showed no clear owner, the land having fallen into a complex legal limbo after the war. Miller, a hard-working man with 5 children and mounting debts, saw the fertile soil as his family's salvation. "My father was a practical man, not given to superstition," wrote Rebecca Miller in her 1927 memoir, Shadows of Elmwood. He laughed off the warnings of neighbors and set about clearing the overgrown land where that grand house had once stood. The foundation stones were still there, arranged in a perfect rectangle with smaller interior divisions showing where the rooms had been. He intended to use those same stones to build our new home. The Miller family set up a temporary camp near the old foundation, while Josiah began the work of preparing the land for planting and construction. On the 3rd night, according to Rebecca's account, her father woke the family at midnight, his face pale in the lamplight. "There's someone walking around the foundation," he whispered, "a woman in old-fashioned dress, carrying papers. She's measuring and making notes." When the family peered out from their tent, they saw nothing, but found footprints in the soft earth the next morning, small feminine prints that circled the foundation repeatedly, stopping at precise intervals. Alongside each footprint was a small marking scratched into the dirt, combinations of numbers and dollar signs. Josiah dismissed these as tricks of shadow and wind, but his wife Martha insisted on blessing the land before construction began in earnest. She invited Reverend Thomas Harrison from the newly rebuilt Elmwood Creek Church to perform the ceremony. "I remember that day clearly, though I was only 7 years old," Rebecca wrote. "The Reverend brought a Bible and holy water, but when he approached the foundation, the water in his silver flask began to boil without heat. When he attempted to read from Psalms, the pages turned by themselves to Exodus, specifically to the passages about debts and financial obligations between men. He left in great distress, telling my parents that the land itself seemed to reject spiritual comfort." Despite these ominous signs, the Millers persisted. Josiah began dismantling the old foundation to repurpose the stones. It was during this process that the first of the accounting anomalies occurred, events that would later become associated with any disturbance of the Sutherland property. Martha Miller, who kept the family's financial records, discovered that their modest savings had somehow decreased overnight. The next day, it happened again. Each morning, their carefully counted funds showed a reduction of exactly 6%, an oddly specific amount that a local banker later identified as the standard interest rate on promissory notes in the 1860s. Simultaneously, Josiah began finding small paper slips tucked into the mortar between the foundation stones. Each bore elegant handwriting, listing a specific amount, a date from the Blackwood era, and two signatures, one belonging to Thaddeus Blackwood and the other to Eleanor Sutherland. These were the infamous Dowry Chits that had featured so prominently in the widow's claim decades earlier. By themselves, these papers seemed mere historical curiosities, wrote Rebecca, but their appearance coincided with our financial troubles. Father collected them in a tin box, intending to donate them to the Historical Society. But each morning, regardless of where he hid the box, we would find it open on the table, the papers arranged in chronological order, with calculations in fresh ink, showing how each small amount had grown over the decades with compound interest. As construction progressed, the Millers' financial situation deteriorated inexplicably. Loans they had never taken appeared on their accounts at the Elmwood Creek Bank. Suppliers claimed they owed for materials never ordered. Tax assessments arrived demanding payment for improvements to the property that had not yet been made. Most disturbing were the dreams that began to plague the family. Each Miller reported similar nighttime visions. A slender woman in black, sitting at a desk piled with ledgers, looking up to inform them precisely how much they owed for trespassing on her property, calculating the interest down to the penny as they watched. "The figure in my dreams was always the same," Rebecca recounted. "She had pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to calculate your worth as you stood before her. She never threatened or acted maliciously. That would have been less terrifying somehow. Instead, she spoke calmly about integrating our assets into her portfolio and securing our investment in the foundation. I would wake, clutching my bedsheets, certain she had been standing over me with her ledger, assessing my value." By the time the new house's framework was completed in November 1878, the Millers were financially ruined. Their savings had vanished, they were burdened with inexplicable debts, and Josiah had begun sleepwalking to the half-built house each night, where he was found measuring and remeasuring the foundation, muttering calculations under his breath. The breaking point came when Martha discovered their children's names added to the Dowry Chits that continued to appear throughout the property. Next to each name was a monetary value, and the phrase "future considerations" to be applied to outstanding balance. The family abandoned the construction site that same day, leaving behind their tools and half-completed home. They fled to Martha's relatives in Tennessee, but their financial troubles followed them. Bank accounts opened in their names in cities they had never visited, accumulating debts they had never incurred. Letters arrived demanding payment for obscure financial instruments dating back to the Blackwood era that supposedly named Josiah as guarantor. Josiah Miller committed suicide in 1880, leaving a note that contained only a series of calculations and the words, "The balance cannot be restored." Martha and the children lived in poverty thereafter, constantly relocating as their financial troubles followed them from town to town. Rebecca alone survived to adulthood, eventually finding work as a clerk in a Memphis accounting firm, where her employer remarked on her uncanny facility with interest calculations and contract law. The property remained vacant until 1895, when the expanding Arkansas Railroad system required land for a new spur line connecting to the main track near Elmwood Creek. Survey teams mapped a route directly through the old Blackwood property, seeing it as conveniently unclaimed land. Jeremiah Stilwell, the chief engineer for the railroad project, documented the strange events that followed in a series of letters to his superiors that were later donated to the Arkansas Railroad Historical Society. Initial surveys of the widow's claim property were promising, showing level ground ideal for track laying. However, subsequent measurements taken on 3 consecutive days showed disturbing inconsistencies. The dimensions of the property seemed to shift overnight. with the old foundation stones being measured in different positions each morning, despite no human interference. The survey markers we placed were found rearranged each day in patterns resembling accounting columns. Our head surveyor, Mr. Phillips, an experienced man not given to fancy, swears he observed the markers moving by themselves at dusk, sliding across the ground like pieces on an invisible game board. Most concerning are the financial irregularities that have plagued the project since we began work on this section. Our payroll records show phantom employees drawing wages. Equipment requisitions include items never ordered or received. The project ledgers, kept under lock and key, show additional columns appearing overnight in a handwriting none of our clerks recognize. Yesterday, we discovered all survey stakes had been replaced with what appear to be antique banknotes and private financial instruments, many bearing the name Sutherland or Blackwood. When our men attempted to remove these items, they reported feeling a sensation like cold fingers calculating their worth. I respectfully request reassignment of the track to bypass this property entirely. The additional cost would be substantially less than the unexplained financial drain we are currently experiencing. The railroad company ignored Stillwell's warnings, attributing them to superstition and poor accounting practices. Construction began in April 1896, with workers breaking ground directly through the old Manor foundation. The first dynamite blast to clear the foundation stones revealed a disturbing discovery. The spaces between the stones contained what appeared to be human remains, partially mummified and clutching scraps of paper. Dr. Edward Harrington, the county coroner called to examine these remains, wrote in his official report, "The bodies appear to have been integrated into the structure during its original construction, a practice unknown in American architectural history. Each corpse holds documents that resemble financial instruments, promissory notes, contracts, and what are labeled as Dowry Chits. Preliminary examination suggests these individuals died not from violence but from a strange form of desiccation, as if the very moisture of their bodies had been systematically extracted and repurposed. Most peculiar is the state of preservation. Though these remains have apparently been entombed for decades, certain organic components, specifically the hands, eyes, and heart, show minimal decomposition. The hands in particular remain flexible enough to maintain their grip on the documents they hold. Close examination shows the fingerprints on these preserved hands match the signatures on the financial documents, suggesting some macabre effort to maintain the validity of these instruments even after death. Despite these gruesome findings, railroad construction continued. Workers reported numerous disturbing incidents, tools rearranging themselves overnight into patterns resembling ledger columns, strange sounds resembling the counting of coins emanating from the empty air, and most commonly, dreams of financial ruin that left them waking in cold sweats. By June 1896, the project had fallen significantly behind schedule and over budget. Inexplicable accounting errors drained the company's resources. Workers began abandoning the site, claiming that something was investing in them against their will. Those who remained exhibited strange behaviors, obsessively counting and recounting their pay, creating complex calculations in the dirt during break times, and collecting scraps of paper they insisted were valuable securities. The situation culminated in what became known as the Widow's Claim Incident on July 7, 1896. According to multiple witness accounts, as workers prepared to lay the final section of track across the old foundation, a dense fog descended on the site despite the summer heat. From within this fog emerged what witnesses described as a procession of figures in 19th-century dress, led by a woman in widow's weeds carrying a leather portfolio. Railroad Supervisor Thomas Grant provided the most detailed account in his subsequent resignation letter. The woman approached our foreman with the confidence of someone making a business proposition rather than a spectre manifesting from fog. She spoke clearly, introducing herself as Eleanor Sutherland, majority shareholder in this land and its improvements. She opened her portfolio and presented documents showing that through some incomprehensible calculation of compound interest on her original dowry, she now owned not merely the land, but the railroad company itself. The papers she displayed bore the letterhead of our corporate office and signatures of our board members, though no such transaction had ever been authorized. When our foreman protested, she smiled and replied that the transaction had been in progress for several decades and had finally matured to completion. What followed defies rational explanation. The fog thickened around each worker, and when it cleared moments later, every man stood motionless, clutching papers identical to those the woman carried. Their eyes had a vacant quality, and when they finally moved again, it was with the coordinated precision of automatons. They abandoned their railroad work and began instead to reconstruct the foundation of the old manor house, using railroad ties as building materials. They worked through the night without rest or sustenance, their movements synchronized as if choreographed. By dawn, they had constructed a perfect outline of the original Blackwood Manor, with themselves positioned like living statues at regular intervals along the walls. When company representatives arrived from Little Rock to investigate the work stoppage, they found the site deserted except for these men, who refused to acknowledge questions or commands. Each worker stood at his position until precisely noon, at which time they collectively collapsed. Medical examination showed each man had died of apparent heart failure at the exact same moment. In the pocket of each deceased worker was a precisely calculated statement showing how his wages, had they been invested at 6% interest from the date of Eleanor Sutherland's original dowry claim in 1861, would exactly equal the value of 1 square foot of the Blackwood property. Beside each calculation was a note indicating that the debt had been paid in full through physical investment in the foundation. I hereby tender my resignation, effective immediately, and strongly advise the company to abandon any further attempts to develop the widow's claim property. The railroad company quietly rerouted the spur line, writing off the substantial financial loss as a strategic reassessment. The partially constructed track was removed within a month, though photographs from 1900 show that the foundation outline created by the workers remained visible for years afterward, with small white objects initially thought to be stones marking each worker's position. Archaeological investigation in the 1970s revealed these objects to be human finger bones, each positioned atop a small cache of 19th-century financial documents. Throughout the early 20th century, the widow's claim property remained conspicuously undeveloped as Elmwood Creek grew around it. Local government records show multiple attempts to auction the land for unpaid taxes, but each auction ended with the same result. All potential buyers would suddenly withdraw their bids after reportedly receiving financial advice from a woman in black who appeared briefly at the courthouse door. During the Great Depression, the property briefly gained national attention when Treasury Department investigators discovered an unusual pattern of financial activity centered around Elmwood Creek. While banks failed across the country and investments lost value precipitously, a small holding company registered as Sutherland Legacy Investments showed extraordinary returns. The company's listed address was simply the Foundation, Widow's Claim, Elmwood Creek, Arkansas, a location that investigators found to be nothing but an empty field with the crumbling remnants of an old house foundation. Treasury agent Robert Maxwell documented his investigation in a report that was classified until 1978. The Sutherland investment entity appears to operate through a complex network of proxy accounts and shell corporations dating back to the Reconstruction era. Most disturbing is its apparent ability to predict market collapses with perfect accuracy, positioning itself to profit enormously from financial disasters while acquiring the devalued assets of ruined investors. Our forensic accountants have traced a pattern suggesting that this entity has been operational for at least 70 years, maintaining consistent returns of exactly 6% compound interest, regardless of broader market conditions. This rate is notably identical to the standard interest on promissory notes in the mid-19th century. Attempts to physically locate the company's principals have proven impossible. The listed address contains no structures or personnel, yet financial transactions continue to originate from this location. Local postal workers report delivering correspondence to a cast-iron mailbox at the property edge, though none recall ever seeing it emptied. Nevertheless, responses to this correspondence are reliably sent from the same address within 24 hours. Most unsettling was our discovery during soil testing of the property. Samples taken from the old foundation area contain abnormal concentrations of organic material consistent with desiccated human tissue, integrated with mineral deposits in a manner our laboratory cannot explain. Deeper excavation revealed fragments of financial documents preserved within these composites, many bearing dates from the 1860s through the present day. I recommend immediate freezing of all assets associated with Sutherland Legacy Investments pending further investigation. The investigation was abruptly terminated in 1933. Treasury Department internal memos indicate that senior officials received an extensive portfolio of documents, demonstrating that the U.S. government itself had unknowingly issued bonds held by the Sutherland entity during the Civil War. These bonds, never redeemed and accruing interest for over 70 years, would, if acknowledged, have constituted a liability exceeding the entire national budget. The matter was quietly dropped, though Maxwell continued his investigation unofficially. He disappeared while visiting Elmwood Creek in 1934. His personal effects were found neatly arranged at the edge of the widow's claim property, alongside a handwritten ledger showing his calculated worth, based on his government salary capitalized over his expected career span. The property remained untouched through World War II and into the post-war economic boom. Developers reported that survey equipment malfunctioned on the property, construction loans fell through inexplicably, and workers refused to break ground after experiencing vivid dreams of being audited by a woman who calculated the value of their souls. In 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, the property briefly came under government scrutiny again when classified documents revealed that Eleanor Sutherland, or someone using that name, had provided financial backing for military contractors on both sides of multiple American conflicts dating back to the Civil War. Elmwood Creek expanded as a bedroom community for the growing urban centers in Arkansas, with housing developments approaching but never quite reaching the boundaries of Widow's Claim. Congressional investigators were particularly troubled by evidence suggesting that this same entity held substantial interests in both American and Soviet defense industries during the Cold War. Senator William Hartman, chair of the closed-door investigation, wrote in his private journal, "The Sutherland financial web represents something unprecedented in economic history, a self-perpetuating system operating outside all normal constraints of time, space, and human lifespan. The entity appears to view wars and human suffering purely as investment opportunities, positioning itself to profit regardless of which side prevails. Most disturbing is the entity's apparent ability to influence policy through economic pressure. We've uncovered evidence that key military decisions in multiple conflicts were shaped by financial instruments controlled by Sutherland interests. The implications are staggering, that our national destiny has been subtly guided for over a century by what amounts to the financial ghost of a 19th century widow with a grudge. The property in Arkansas appears to be not merely the entity's registered address, but something more, a focal point or anchor for whatever force perpetuates this financial haunting. Physical investigation has proven dangerous. Two of our agents suffered severe cardiac events after attempting to excavate portions of the old foundation, and a third reported being approached by a woman in black who offered to calculate the exact value of his remaining heartbeats. The investigation was terminated after Senator Hartman himself visited Elmwood Creek in August 1968. He returned to Washington visibly shaken, immediately liquidated his considerable personal investments, and resigned his position. When pressed for explanation, he would only say that he had reviewed the complete ledger and found that some debts can never be repaid in full. Hartman spent his remaining years living in near poverty, donating most of his assets to charitable causes. In his last interview before his death in 1972, he stated cryptically, "She showed me the true cost of building a fortune. The foundation always requires investment of more than money. I've seen how the ledger balances in the end, and I want no part of it." The modern era brought new attempts to develop or at least understand the widow's claim property. In 1985, a team from the University of Arkansas Department of Archaeology obtained permission to conduct a systematic excavation of the foundation area. Using advanced technology, including ground-penetrating radar and computerized mapping, they sought to create a comprehensive record of the site before commercial development could erase its historical significance. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, who led the excavation, published only one brief paper on their findings before the university abruptly cancelled the project. That paper, published in the Journal of Historical Archaeology, contained observations that the academic community largely dismissed as methodologically flawed or even fabricated. The foundation of Blackwood's Sutherland Manor represents an architectural anomaly that defies conventional archaeological classification. Ground-penetrating radar reveals a structure that appears to extend far deeper than would be functional or necessary for a 19th-century plantation home, with passages and chambers that would place portions of the original structure at least 30 feet below ground level. More problematic is the composition of the foundation material itself. While appearing to be conventional limestone and mortar consistent with the period, microscopic analysis reveals organic compounds integrated throughout the mineral matrix. These compounds contain human DNA from multiple individuals, combined with paper fibers and what appear to be minute fragments of 19th-century financial documents. Most inexplicable is the dynamic nature of the site. Despite no observable external intervention, the foundation dimensions show measurable changes between survey sessions. Electronic measuring equipment malfunctions in patterns that correspond to mathematical functions, specifically compound interest calculations. Digital storage devices used at the site develop data corruptions that, when analyzed, form coherent financial records dating from 1861 to the present day. The research team has experienced unusual financial phenomena since beginning work at the site. Team members report unexplained accounting errors in their personal finances, with precisely 6% of their research stipends disappearing from secured accounts each month. Several have discovered their signatures on financial documents they have no recollection of signing, often dated decades before their births. Most disturbing is the recurring presence of what team members have dubbed the auditor, a female figure in 19th-century mourning clothes observed at the periphery of the excavation site, particularly at dusk. While initially dismissed as a local attempting to disrupt the research, photographic evidence shows this figure casting no shadow and appearing in locations that would have been physically inaccessible from the ground. I reluctantly conclude that the Blackwood Sutherland site represents not merely a historical location, but an active phenomenon that continues to operate according to its own internal logic, a logic fundamentally financial in nature. Whatever force Eleanor Sutherland set in motion with her dowry claim in 1861 appears to have achieved a form of self-perpetuation that transcends conventional understanding of both economics and physical reality. Following publication of this paper, the university's archaeology department suffered an unprecedented financial crisis. Endowments were suddenly withdrawn, grants cancelled, and accounting errors discovered that threatened the institution's accreditation. Dr. Montgomery resigned her position and disappeared from academic circles entirely. Rumors suggest she now works as a financial advisor for a private wealth management firm specializing in generational asset protection with guaranteed returns of 6% in perpetuity. The most recent chapter in the widow's claim saga began in 2008 during the global financial crisis. As markets collapsed and venerable financial institutions failed, analysts at the Treasury Department identified a pattern of transactions originating from a holding company called Sutherland Foundation Investments. This entity had not only predicted the mortgage-backed securities collapse, but had positioned itself to acquire massive portfolios of devalued properties across the country. Most concerning to investigators was the discovery that this holding company's headquarters was registered at the same Elmwood Creek address that had been associated with Eleanor Sutherland since 1861. When federal agents visited the location, they found not an empty field, but a startling development. Construction was underway on a perfect replica of the original Blackwood Manor being built upon the old foundation. The construction company, when questioned, produced contracts and permits that all appeared to be in perfect order, though local officials had no record of issuing them. The foreman explained that his crew was working for an old family investment firm that had owned the property since before the Civil War and had finally decided to restore the company headquarters to its original condition. Most disturbing were the foreman's casual remarks about the construction materials. The client has very specific requirements about integrating historical elements into the new structure. Those darker stones in the foundation, they're from the original building, the really dense ones that the boys say feel warm to the touch. The client calls those matured investments, says they've been appreciating in value for over 150 years. Federal financial investigators attempted to freeze Sutherland Foundation Investments' assets pending investigation, only to discover that the entity held leverage over numerous major financial institutions through an elaborate network of loans and debt instruments, many dating back decades or even centuries. Some of these documents, when examined by forensic accountants, appeared to be original financial instruments from the 19th century, the ink somehow still fresh, with signatures that matched those of long-dead financial leaders. The investigation stalled as the agencies involved found themselves dealing with their own inexplicable accounting irregularities. Several agents reported being approached by a financial consultant who presented them with detailed portfolios showing how their government pensions could be optimized through alternative investment strategies. Those who accepted these consultations subsequently withdrew from the investigation, using identical language in their resignation letters. I have reviewed the complete ledger and found the accounts to be in order. By 2010, the replica of Blackwood Manor stood complete on its original foundation. The property, now surrounded by an ornate iron fence with posted notices identifying it as private property of Sutherland Legacy Holdings, established 1861, became the subject of renewed local legends. Residents of Elmwood Creek report lights visible in the windows at night, though the building appears unoccupied during daylight hours. Mail is regularly delivered to the property, though no one has ever seen it collected. Financial analysts have noted that while Sutherland Legacy Holdings maintains a minimal public profile, its influence in global markets appears substantial and growing. Economic historians have identified its distinctive pattern of investment, acquiring distressed assets during crises and holding them through precisely calculated appreciation cycles in market data stretching back to the Reconstruction era. Most recently, in 2023, visitors to the property have reported seeing a slender woman in anachronistic black clothing walking the grounds in the evening hours, carrying what appears to be an antique leather portfolio. Local real estate agents receive regular inquiries about properties throughout Elmwood Creek from a woman identifying herself only as E. Sutherland, representing family interests in the area since 1861. Those who have met with this representative describe her as ageless and unnervingly precise in her financial calculations. Several have reported that after such meetings, they discovered their signatures on documents they have no recollection of signing, often involving property transfers or investment arrangements with terms extending far beyond their expected lifespans. Banking officials in the region have noted an unusual pattern in recent foreclosures. Properties seized due to default are frequently acquired by shell companies traced back to Sutherland legacy holdings. In each case, investigation reveals that the original mortgage included unusual clauses in nearly microscopic print, establishing alternative payment methods in the event of default. County records show that Sutherland-affiliated entities now hold titles to nearly 30% of Elmwood Creek's properties, a percentage that has grown steadily and precisely at an annual rate of 6%. Most disturbing are the reports from individuals who have defaulted on obligations to these entities. They describe dreams of standing before a woman in black who calculates the remaining value of their lives with cold precision. Many have subsequently disappeared, only to have relatives receive precisely calculated final account statements showing their debts as paid in full through direct investment in the foundation. Construction workers involved in recent renovations at the Blackwood Sutherland property report discovering small paper dolls hidden within the walls. Faceless figures crafted from fragments of financial documents, each bearing the name of someone connected to the property's long history. Some of these dolls, when examined closely, appear to have been fashioned from contemporary banking statements and mortgage contracts, the paper still crisp and new. The current manager of Elmwood Creek's oldest bank branch, speaking on condition of anonymity, shared a disturbing observation. Every April 16th, the anniversary of Thaddeus Blackwood's death, our computer systems experience identical glitches. Account balances flicker, showing momentary reductions of exactly 6% before returning to normal. Our technical team has never found an explanation. But one of our oldest employees, whose family has been in banking here since the 19th century, simply calls it the widow collecting her interest. Financial regulatory authorities continue to monitor Sutherland legacy holdings with growing concern, noting its apparent ability to operate outside normal market constraints and its consistent pattern of profiting from economic disasters. Attempts to identify the entity's principals or beneficial owners have proven fruitless. Corporate filings list only a board of directors whose names match those of individuals connected to the property throughout its history, many of whom would be well over 100 years old if still living. The most recent SEC investigation concluded with a classified report that, according to insider sources, contains a single recommendation: financial engagement with Sutherland Legacy Holdings or its affiliates should be avoided at all costs. The apparent returns, while attractive, come with unacceptable terms that may not be evident until collection is due. As recently as last month, visitors to Elmwood Creek reported seeing small paper notices posted throughout the town, elegant, handwritten announcements that read simply, "Sutherland Legacy Holdings announces portfolio expansion. Investment opportunities available for qualified individuals. Terms, 6% compound interest, guaranteed in perpetuity. Collateral requirements discussed in private consultation." Those who have inquired about these opportunities have not been heard from since. though their signatures have appeared on property transfers and financial instruments filed with increasing frequency at the county recorder's office. The manor house stands on its ancient foundation, lights visible in the windows at night, the scratch of pen on paper sometimes audible to those who pass too close to its iron fence. Inside, according to those few who have glimpsed through the windows, a slender woman in black sits at a massive desk covered with ledgers, both ancient and modern, calculating the precise value of every soul in her expanding portfolio. Eleanor Sutherland's dowry chits continue to surface in unexpected places, in safe deposit boxes untouched for generations, in the hidden compartments of antique desks, in the sealed walls of renovated homes throughout Arkansas and beyond. Each bears her elegant signature alongside that of someone long dead, the ink somehow never fading, the obligation never fully discharged. Financial experts who have examined these documents note an unsettling pattern. The interest calculations, if carried forward to the present day, would equal approximately the current market value of a human life as calculated by insurance actuaries. Perhaps most disturbing is what was discovered during the most recent renovation of the Elmwood Creek Courthouse in 2022. Behind a sealed wall in the records room, workers found a small leather-bound ledger dating from 1861. Its final entry, in an elegant feminine hand, reads, "The true nature of compound interest is not financial, but spiritual. What grows is not merely money, but obligation, binding debtor to creditor across time and beyond death. My dowry built the fortune he claimed as his own. My calculations have reclaimed what was mine. The foundation is now secure, and the portfolio expands precisely as projected. New investments are always welcome. Terms remain fixed at 6%, compounded eternally. Collection is guaranteed. The ledger now resides in the County Historical Museum, though staff report that its pages appear to update themselves periodically, with new names and calculations appearing in the same elegant handwriting. Those whose names appear often report dreams of standing before a woman who measures their worth with cold precision, explaining how their lives might be optimized for maximum return when finally added to the foundation. If you visit Elmwood Creek today, locals might warn you to avoid the elegant Greek Revival mansion at the edge of town. They might suggest you check any contract carefully before signing, particularly if it offers exactly 6% interest. They might tell you to be wary of a slender woman in black who might approach with investment opportunities too favorable to be believed. But perhaps most importantly, they will tell you never to dispute the widow's claim to what she believes is rightfully hers. For Eleanor Sutherland's ledgers never close, her calculations never cease, and her investments continue to appreciate, one soul at a time. The foundation grows stronger with each new addition. The portfolio expands with each passing year. And somewhere in that grand manor house built upon the bodies of those who underestimated her, the widow posts her dowry chits and calculates the interest due on centuries of debt. Her terms are always the same, 6%, compounded eternally. The only variable is what form your payment will take and how much of yourself will remain when your account is finally balanced. The story of Eleanor Sutherland serves as a chilling reminder that some claims transcend legal documents, some debts outlive those who incurred them, and some foundations require more than stone and mortar to stand the test of time. In our modern world of digital banking and automated transactions, we rarely consider what truly backs our financial systems: the human cost of wealth, the spiritual dimension of debt, the ways in which we invest not just our money, but our very selves in the edifices we build. Perhaps before signing your next mortgage, accepting your next credit card, or engaging in your next financial transaction, you should read the fine print very carefully. Some terms extend beyond your lifetime. Some interest compounds eternally. And somewhere, a widow may be calculating exactly how your life's value might appreciate when properly invested in her ever-expanding foundation. Look to God, look to Jesus Christ. For in the final accounting, only divine grace can balance the ledger of your soul.